So also, thanks very much, Sean. Can we just welcome Sean to coming along to the event and tonight as well? Okay, so I'll kick off, Sean. So one of the questions here is around any of the ideas or content or things you're monitoring that you're either close to putting into the report, but it wasn't ready to be put into the report or was omitted or removed.
Hello, everyone. This was pitched as a very casual chat with 3 or 4 people at the bar. No, there was nothing omitted. There was things we would have probably liked more time with. We would have liked more time with the data. We got a good bit of time with the data, but you can always do it more time with the data. There was a lot of data. The piece that you probably like to have spent more time on was the whole paperwork side of things. That started to come out later and later in the piece about how frustrated the whole industry was with the amount of paperwork that had to be done, and did it really make things better, and how do you deal with that issue? So that probably got a paragraph in the report where I would have probably liked to have given it a chapter. But like all of these reviews, you probably wish you had another 6 months to 12 months to actually to get things the way you want it. But they were probably the two things.
Thank you for that one. So one of the criticisms of the report, which we hear a lot, or I hear a lot, is around it tells us nothing new. How would you respond to those types of comments?
Yeah, there's been plenty of criticism, which is good. Most of it's been pretty healthy. There's, I suppose, a few bits to it that I think are important. I think there is stuff that is a little new for the mining industry around the HROs. And I would encourage the industry to grab that and run with it. And it's a hard concept and it's a difficult concept. And a lot of people are confused by it. But that's why we should keep talking about it and try and pull it apart and understand it. Certainly there was stuff that was nothing new, particularly around the issues with supervision, the issues with training, the issues with controls. And what I sort of say to the criticism is, yes, sure, we're not. I'm not telling you anything new in that, but these things are the things that are still killing people. You know, when you look at the causal diagrams, they're still the things that, as an industry, we haven't got right. When you dig into the industry, you start to see some of the reasons why we haven't got them right. Paperwork is one. How we approach risk is another, and we can talk about any of these things as we go on. But yeah, those criticisms, they're valid in the sense that yes, it's nothing new, but I think the fact that those things are killing people still means we haven't got them right. We need to keep talking about them.
Yeah, well said. Another one around challenges to report is around the information. So it's an analysis of information from previous incident investigations, and or that it's based on the analysis of ICAM factors, and therefore was only going to tell us more about issues within this established categorisation set. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this was interesting. So we looked at 47 fatalities. To look at the 47 fatalities, we looked at the nature and cause reports that the regulator produces after each fatality occurs. There was one company who gave us their investigation report, but for the other 46, it was the regulator view. A couple of things about that are interesting. Number one, you start saying at the beginning, well, should I believe these reports? Should we start to ask questions about these reports? How do we deal with that? And then pretty quickly you realize, well, you can't go and investigate the 47 again, and that's probably not a good use of the time. So it was more a case of saying, right, if this is the information we have, how good is it and what do we do with it? What we found was, yes, there was an ICAM in the end, a very, very short sort of 2-page ICAM in the end of these reports, but the majority of the reports were focused on collecting evidence. So there was a lot of really good evidence collected. And what we really did with that was, what you saw in the reports was, it was probably an attempt at an ICAM at the end that was really just trying to put it into that. But a lot of the findings were really coming from this pretty strong evidentiary basis. So lots of photographs, lots of records, lots of transcripts and stuff like that. So we just went back and we said, well, let's put those into causal diagrams. Let's not worry about the ICAM side of it and just try and get the facts out. Because I think our view was the facts weren't getting out. We were quite stunned because we only found out towards the end of the review that these nature and cause reports weren't public. We only found out that 3 of the 47 were. And what that did was, which became obvious after the report came out, that most people in the mining industry didn't really have the official record on how all these people died. And in the absence of that record, we were all doing the things that normal human beings do. We hear rumor, we have theories about what went wrong, and people had some very strong views on what killed people. And some of them were right and some of them were wrong. And I think I say to people, if the only thing you look at in the report is Appendix B, which has got 43 of those causal diagrams, just 1 page per fatality, it's a flow chart. Go and have a look at them, because they will tell you how people are really dying in the industry and the issues we have to try and tackle to make things better. So were there ICAM categorization issues? Not really, and that was really part of the way the reports were written. You'd always like more information, but this is the real world.
You've worked across a number of industries. How would you describe the receptivity of the mining industry to this report compared to other industries, for example, oil and gas?
This is a question designed for me to make friends, isn't it? It's been really interesting. When the review came out first, we had one particular meeting, which some people are in the room who were at that meeting, and it was exciting, would be one word you'd use it to describe it. The feedback was excellent, but certainly there was anger, there was upset, there was feelings of unfairness. But as the conversations went on over the months, the conversations started to change, and you can certainly see now that people are really hungry for change, and you see that at a lot of levels. We have to try and convert that into real change now, and there has been lots of little wins. I think one of the big things is that the industry isn't terrific at talking to each other about what we're doing, because there is some really important wins out there. I think if you go and compare with oil and gas, so I did a presentation to the oil and gas industry in Queensland, and that was fascinating in terms of the differences. It started off with a lot of the oil and gas industry, and these were very senior people, sort of smiling and saying, oh, mining industry, we don't do that in oil and gas. We learned not to do that years ago. Until we got to the bit about the high percentage of soft controls used in the mining industry. And suddenly everyone in the oil and gas industry got incredibly quiet. And one CEO said, we do that. We do exactly that. So the challenges there are the same. I would say the single biggest difference between the two industries is that certainly not all companies, but there is a perception that to manage risk in mining, you design a good system, a good safety system to keep people safe. You make sure they comply with that system. If they don't, you penalize them. And that's how you achieve safety. And human error is a real thing, and humans shouldn't be fallible. And I've had lots of arguments over the year about that. You go to the oil and gas industry, and they start with humans are fallible. Now what do we do? How do you put the system in place to stop human error killing people? And I think that's probably one of the most important conversations the mining industry has to have, is how do you start by saying, okay, we're going to have human error. Now, I'm not against accountability. Accountability is still important. But how do you accept that human error is real and design a system to stop fatalities and serious accidents resulting from that? I think that's the real challenge. And I think that's where the mining industry can look to oil and gas and say, well, how do you do that? Can look to medicine, can look to other industries that involve people and organizations. Because what we see is the same things kill people. The technical difference across the industries, the technical differences between them can vary. But at the end of the day, these is just people and organizations. That's the challenge that we have to solve. So I would encourage everyone to look to the other industries and say, well, how are they doing it, particularly oil and gas? But there's lots more to look to as well. Aviation, how do they do it? How do they approach risk? How do they approach human error? because there certainly is another way of tackling that. But it's a controversial subject.
I think I've heard a term, fail safely is one of the terms I've heard bandied about in some pockets of the industry, and that's an interesting one.
Josh is down there and he's got some views on the term fail safely. One of the interesting things he said to me on fail safely is, failing safely is about saying, well, if everything does go wrong, what does failure look like? Are we going to die? Are we going to be seriously injured? Mining companies hate the term because it means an acceptance that failure is even possible. And we shouldn't start the job before that. So it's a really, another controversial part of it, but a very important part of it.
So that's a call out to Josh's presentation tomorrow at 1:35. Yeah. So we're now a year and a half on from the report. During this time, is there anything you've observed that only reinforces a certain recommendation or a learning or a finding, or has there been something new that you've seen emerging a year and a half on?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're writing these things and you're just trying to get them right, and you're trying to work against the deadline and get through the material, and you're trying to work out what the right answer is. And when we started to look at the whole concept of the HROs, and when we looked at what was causing the fatalities, and when we looked at what was causing the serious accidents, and how the industry viewed itself, and how the regulator viewed it, and how all that worked, it just became more and more obvious that HROs were the solution. So I think the bit that I'm really pleased about is that when we started talking about HROs over a year ago, it was, some people said, oh, this is another safety theory. Do we have to have another one? What does this mean? Is it practical? How do we implement it? And the really pleasing thing is that a year on, people are still trying to work it out. They're still trying to say, no, we want to do this. Just help us do it. Help us work out how to do it. And there's a whole bunch of companies who are doing that trying to help work it out. And there are a whole bunch of minds who are trying to make it work as well. So I think the fact that a year on, you can still get a room full of people wanting to talk about HROs and how we actually go about doing it. The only thing I would really say about that is that you all have a massive role in working out how HROs get applied to the mining industry, because you're the ones who are going to work out how to do it. The key is each mine site is going to do a different bit and make a bit of progress. We have to figure out how to start sharing all that across the industry. That's where we're going to make the real progress. But there's plenty of barriers to that. There's plenty of reasons. There's plenty of fear of the law and all that getting in the way of that as well. But I think if we can solve that problem, we can really start to hack away at the beast that is HROs. So that's, I think, the most pleasing is to see that people really want to give that a go. And they do really want to give it a go, which is great.
So final question from myself that's prepared, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So we're all about learning from others' success. Are there any examples of a site or an instance where some of the recommendations, or one of the recommendations, have been really picked up and embraced and applied that you can share?
Well, there's plenty I probably can't share without asking permission to talk about it. But I think one of the really interesting thing is about HROs. With HROs, you don't go and throw out your existing system. It's all about really looking at your existing system and working out, why is it not producing what I think it should be producing? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why it won't be. Some will be specific to your site, some will be more general. And it's really trying to get to the bottom of what are those issues and working out how to fix them. And some of the fixes are really counterintuitive. We know of a number of sites, some who are involved with, who are really pushing getting a better reporting culture in now. And how do you get a better reporting culture in? How do you make it easy for people to report, and not just report the simple stuff, but the stuff you really want to know about, the incidents that are the bad near misses, that really educate you on where your risk lies. When we put together the podcast, there were plenty of people who talked about what they were doing. Bobby Foote talked about what they were doing in BHP with the supervisor program and the use of AI and the data analytics. Josh from Mitchell Services, who come and hear him tomorrow, talked about everything they were doing in Mitchell Services in terms of real implementation in some of this stuff. So there are pockets of people doing different things that you should go and listen to and go and talk to. So there's the reporting one is I think one of the biggies to tackle because it's where the potential low-hanging fruit are. The interesting thing is there's lots of complications with that. Nobody wants to report more things to the regulator. How do we get over that issue? And the regulator will be here tomorrow and you can ask them. But it's having those really mature conversations that I think are really going to make the difference. Because I think the obvious thing is we all want the same thing in a really genuine way.
Thank you. Okay, so is there anyone, we've got a microphone up the back. Is there anyone who's got a question or a comment for Sean? If you do, put your hand up and one of the team will, okay, right up the front.
Thanks. Thanks, Sean, for your review. My name's Ken Singer, Broadmeadow Mine. And
I owe you an email.
well, I'll tap into that. So along those lines, so we're rolling out supervisor refresher training, and we just felt that, and there's some statutory required competencies in industry, but we just felt that we just couldn't roll it out without a big session on the review. And that's because there's a lot of references there to supervision. And I guess how do you break ourselves out of the fatality cycle with supervision, and how supervision can improve or be more effective is probably another way to put it, and be more effective, because I guess when you look at the review, there's a lot of stuff saying these things happened around supervision, all these events unwittingly happened. And so we shared that with our supervisors. And as I say, we have 100 frontline supervisors. We just felt we need to share this report because the report's about them and me and us, the supervision in coal mines. And the approach we've taken is, well, this is what's being replayed to us. Because, I mean, who's got the solution? Who's got the solution? So we're seeking solutions from our front line because that seems to be just paramount in an effective, high reliability organisation, have a role to play. So interested in your further advice, and we do take our teams through the causal analysis, and in the context of what's the role of supervision here, and without trying to be judgmental as well, and that's always a challenge when we're talking about our neighbours and our friends and our industry, and that sometimes that can tap into some motion as well and some defence. So what would be your advice, and you've already given me some, obviously, use those causal analysis for our front line, and what are some of the messages we can replay to our front line, and what are some of the things potentially we can include in our refresher training to make it resonate, make it stick and engage?
So can I ask you a question first before you give the mic away? What have you found has, I wish I had the answer is what I'm getting to here, but what have you found has resonated, Ken, most?
So we've made 2 adjustments, iterations on the way in response to the feedback. So we'll always go back and say, was that useful? Because obviously they're the customer. Frontline's the customer. And we're here we need to understand how we can support the customer as senior leadership and create that opaqueness and that environment that says you're empowered to stop if uncomfortable, all those things. So we'd only targeted 100 people, and already word's got out. More people want to be there. We've got training supervisors want to get them to the course. So they're picking up, I guess, lessons. We look at JSAs, and we say, let's have a look at the effectiveness of this JSA, because there's some stuff in your review that says, didn't identify. I guess there's a principle, if you can't see it, you can't manage it. So how can we be more effective in our risk identification processes? And once you've identified a control, how do you actually make sure it's in place and effective in the workplace? So those little work groups, we break into work groups and have the teams, that's been very useful. And I say, and the feedback so far is we want more of this. And I guess it's to practice and talk at that level in their own, with their own peers.
Yep. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it's I don't have the answer to the supervision problem when we get asked that a lot, and we're trying to work up, well, what would the solution look like, and we're certainly not there yet. I mean, if we go to what we found in the causal diagrams, and we were very careful because people said it was supervisors, and then the more we get into it, you go, no, this is a supervision problem, which is different from blaming supervisors. We're not blaming supervisors. But supervision is much more than just the supervisor. Is there enough of them? Are they trained? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all the stuff you're talking about. But we had everything in the review, from fatalities that occurred because the supervisor was not there, to the supervisor was there and simply watched people do things that were hazardous, and there was a risk competence issue there, to supervisors watching people do stuff in a way that wasn't safe, to watching them use this piece of equipment that they weren't trained on. So we saw a very broad range of supervision problems. And when you go to the serious accidents, we see people not identifying the hazard is a big issue, people not making sure the control was effective, or making sure an effective control was there. They're the two pieces, and they're like risk 101. So I think anything that sort of tackles those issues, the competence, as you say, the empowerment to, can a supervisor really stop a job? If they can't, then that's not really a supervisor issue, that's a supervision problem, and that's coming down through the company. So it's a broad question. I wish I had a simpler answer, but I don't at the moment. But hopefully we'll find one in the future. But if anyone's got solutions of things are working, then let us know. Any other comments on that would be welcome from the audience.
Does anyone have something to add to that they're doing within their organisation, or a question for Sean?
Hi, Sean. Gents, thanks for this. I guess it was interesting to hear you talk about fallibility and risk, and I think it's a good concept to probably bridge. You referred to the oil and gas industry and some of the differences and how they apply that sort of framework. I'm curious to know your thoughts if you think that the legislation has any influence over that sort of mentality that's sort of through the industry.
Yeah, that's a nice, thorny question. The answer is why are the systems created? Why is the paperwork created? And then how do people behave inside that? So all the paperwork we're getting building up in the companies, and the amount of procedures everyone's meant to understand, the amount of inductions and material people are meant to process, is that there because of the legislation? Is it there because the regulator asks for it? Is it there because the company asks for it? There's no doubt when you talk to a lot of frontline workers, as far as they're concerned, the reason why the paperwork exists is somebody up the line wants to cover their backside. So the legislation is going to be part of it, but the companies are going to be part of it. All of that, it's the system there that we have to look at and try and see if we can manage. Has anyone read Paper Safe? Yeah, Josh, Jody, yeah. And if you've not read Paper Safe, go and have a read of Paper Safe. It's a small book, but basically it's a lawyer in Australia in Perth, and he's looked at, not specifically the mining industry, he's looked at just general workplace health and safety, but what sends you to jail? What gets you convicted? And when you read that, you basically see that the wall of paperwork we try and build is not a defense. Now, the question we have, and I have, and Jody who works, we have, and we're trying to work through with a lawyer is, what does that mean? We know mining is different. What does that mean in mining? Is it that different? If it turns out all this paperwork doesn't give you protection, then that potentially for me is a game changer. Because it allows us to simplify and declutter and pull it back to an effective system. Because there's no doubt in my mind that the paperwork is just clogging the system and clogging people's belief in why the paperwork exists. Is it fair to say that for most frontline people, paperwork exists because it's a pain, it slows them down, and it's somebody else trying to cover their backside if something goes wrong? not exactly helping the situation and probably doing quite a bit of damage. That's probably the single most important conversation that needs to be had with boards in the mining industry around Australia. Does the paperwork make you feel safer? And then find out whether it actually does by asking a lawyer, not me. That's got to be the way forward.
Any other questions from anyone? Oh, got a few.
Yeah, Sean, I think the previous question touched slightly on it, but just interested to hear your thoughts on compliance management versus risk management, and is managing one going to manage the other, and are we too focused on compliance management that we lose sight of actually managing the risk?
Yes. I mean, if we go to what HROs are all about, I mean, compliance is important. You can't be too flippant about that. But it's really important that if we, so many of the systems we design to make people comply with don't work as well as we think they are, because we're in an incredibly complex environment. What I say to companies who talk about HROs is, we tend to build companies to push information down. We push procedures down and we push systems down. But how good is your company at getting information flushed back up? Information about the real hazards that you face, how the work is actually done versus how you think the work is done. All of those things. We'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, but when you start to move towards HRO, it's less about saying, well, what are the formal procedures and why are you not complying with them? It's more about saying, well, what are the formal procedures and why do you feel you shouldn't be complying with them? And let's bring the formal into line with the informal. You do that safely, but you do it in a controlled way. Nobody wins if the company works differently on paper than how it works in the mine site. And I think that's going to be a big step forward for the mining industry if they can take it, is, are we comfortable with information coming back up, and will we action it and build trust with people that we will action it and that people will have psychological safety, all of those things to actually change the system. So that's going to be a big part of it moving forward. We won't solve that problem if we believe you can design the perfect system, and as long as people would stick to the bloody procedures that we put in place to keep them safe, we'd be fine. That view still is incredibly prevalent from the top. And we have to challenge that view, and we have to ask, what are we trying to achieve by clinging on to that view, particularly when we're so prone to blaming human error. Because that doesn't tell us the system causes that allowed that human error to culminate in the incident. So whenever you look at major incidents, the information that was the precursor to the event that should have told people it was about to happen always exists. It just wasn't flowing to the right people who could take the right action to action some change. We see that again and again and again. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Sean. This is Paulo Gomes from Greyhound Resources. I would like just to share learning from our company. We started pushing the hazard report system, and what we found out is when you ask those things, you get what you ask for. So you get the numbers, you get the information, but not exactly the learnings. What we changed it to is we invested in psychological safety. In fact, we had few sessions. We started from the top and came down. That's caused a major change in the way how our management team starts seeing and talking to our workforce, to the point that now, instead of just asking for numbers, we prefer to go and talk, one person at a time. And that's where we are learning a lot, because, for example, this morning we had a conversation with a guy, and we learned so much, things that a paper wouldn't be able to capture. So much, all the stories about his day and all the problems he has been encountering, and all those things, again, I think requires a massive change in the way how we approach those things. I know it's not a question, but just sure.
Oh, I totally support what you're saying, but I got a question for you. How did you convince the higher ups in your company that this was the way to go? That more information of bad news was good? How did you do that?
I almost lost my job. Seriously, not only one time, but a few actually. Took months, and the reality was only because I spent the time with the workers, and I could see how painful, how difficult it was for them up here. And then I start bringing the information, and I can say I'm quite lucky in the fact that I have my manager, because she was really supportive and feeding the top of the company with the information. So we create this feedback loop where we are able to make the change and convince them that they had to see, they start coming here, visiting our sites, talking to our people and listening to them. And that caused them to change the way how they perceived the work, because they saw how, as you start saying about procedures, they had this perception that compliance would drive the performance, instead of just nowadays they see that is the relationship in enabling the work that will cause that. It will be the safety will emerge from that relationship.
Yep.
Just
You weren't the one who nearly fired him, were you? No?
No.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I think just to add to that was getting our management team to understand that the workforce had a voice and they were being muffled, essentially. So we had a toxic leader that buffered the Bowen Basin, was remote, held separate, very isolated, very hard to get into. And it was really just demonstrating the risks that we have. We already, with split shift FIFO bus drivers, you have pretty much tick all the boxes for high risk. To demonstrate throwing in COVID into that mix, and the lack of support networks out, that we needed to assess that. So I think the buy-in that it was a problem was basically about demonstrating the risk and the possible consequences. But certainly have much more buy-in that the people are more than the leaders, and that the team on the ground are the voice and often our protectors. So they're our last line of defence. They're on their own. They control a bus of 50 people. So their ability to interpret weak signals and make change is our dynamic risk management, I guess.
No, that's fantastic. And I think for people who are saying, how do you do this HRO thing? You do it one step at a time, and you do it like you did it. If you want to know how to, get more reports, go talk to you guys. Find out how you did it. Find out the barriers you had to overcome to get there. Josh has done a lot of that at Mitchell Services as well. This can be done. It's hard, but it can be done. And this is why this sharing is absolutely critical to see how it works. Thank you.
Yeah, hi Sean. Just a question about the fatality cycle. So I think everyone's quite aware of it, but my question is, how do we know, or what are the indicators to tell us that we've moved past, say, a lull in the cycle where we're not actually being more safe and we've moved into those HRO elements where the safety has occurred? Like, how are we going to know that transition's happened?
There's no easy answer to that. We've seen traditionally that we tend to go through a year when no one gets killed, and we go through a year where a number of people get killed, anywhere between 2 and 5, and we're at the beginning of that now. If past performance is indicative, then it's dangerous now. There's you know, you're in the industry, does complacency set in? How do you combat that? And we all know it does. Complacency sets in with all of us. We, I don't know. I don't know. There is no easy answer. This is the problem. We have to, you know, guard against the complacency, but the fact that we're here, we're talking about this, can we get meaningful, real change happening on the ground? And the answer is yes, there's meaningful, real change happening in pockets in different ways. It's hard to do. You need buy-in throughout the entire organization. We just got to learn from each other. But we got to be aware. I think the key thing for me is you can't look back at a year with no fatalities and say, tick the box, we're done. That's the key lesson from that for me. You've got to guard against that very, very carefully. Particularly now, I think the serious accident rate is down compared to where it was in general. So we got to be really, really careful now. We got to keep the chronic on ease. But let's get on and make some meaningful change. Let's have the arguments with our bosses. Let's get people involved and have the conversation, which is what we're doing, you know, today and tomorrow, which is great.
Hey, Sean, Matthew. My question's around where the rubber hits the road with the coal mine workers about risk management. And I've been in the industry 30 years and I've seen the, you know, JSAs and risk management tools, racks and that used at the coal face, where we keep referring back to with regards to likelihood and consequence, and we've got to score something to say it's safe or not safe, and different groups have, you can't go above this level, or, you know, you've got to put other things in place. What are the oil and gas doing around, instead of having a score matrix that you've, you know, and given the people the power around that ALARA or acceptable level of risk, are they doing something different around that?
I don't know is the simple answer to that. I'm not sure how they're dealing with that. That's the, I wish I could say more, but I can't. I mean, for me, the whole thing is controls. What we keep seeing in the fatalities is controls that everyone thought were not working on the day, probably hadn't been working for a while. And then it was just that day that there was bad luck. Someone was standing in the wrong place, wrong time, or you had someone had made a human error, and the consequence of that human error was a fatality. I think that's the issue we have to work through. And you know, we check controls, we do all those sorts of things. We have to acknowledge that the pressure for them to be green is massive. Absolutely massive. No one likes to tell the CEO or the board that there's plenty of critical control failures happening. But I think what we're seeing is if you don't have critical control failures happening, then you're getting, you know, silly news. These things are not working, you know, all the time. One of the things we briefly talk about tomorrow is, you know, if you're a CEO and you're not feeling you're getting bad news, well, where should you look? Well, look where you're starting to get the really good news. You know, what looks fantastic. Have a look at that, dig into that. If all your news is good, you should probably be very, very worried. This industry is way too complex for everything to work all the time. The danger we have is we believe it should. That's the real danger.
Yeah. So if there's no other questions, I think everyone's silent. Everyone's just digesting that. So please thank Sean for spending time there and answering those questions.